The Vance mansion glittered as if it had never known decay, chandeliers burning over marble floors, the scent of aged wine thick in the air. Guests arrived in black silk and careful smiles, unaware that the night was staged like a play, every detail choreographed for deception. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Vance, immaculate in pearls, her lipstick sharp as intent. Beside her, Sterling Vance, the patriarch, polished his cufflinks the way other men polished truth, to reflect only what suited them. At the far end, Julian, the golden son, laughed too loudly at nothing. And opposite him, a ghost, Paige Vance. No, Paige Blake now. The name change wasn't just legal, it was spiritual. Every letter in Blake was chosen like a blade. Clean, efficient, sharp enough to cut through her past. But tonight, she wasn't a spy. She was a daughter. Come home wearing politeness like armor. Paige, Eleanor purred, you look healthy. Translation, you survived despite me. How inconvenient. Paige's smile was thin. I try to keep in shape. Occupational hazard. Still tinkering with those little research projects? Eleanor asked. Paige tilted her head. Something like that. Julian smirked. Mom means she still can't believe the CIA would hire someone who used to hide in the library. Paige chuckled softly, her voice smooth. Maybe they needed someone who actually read the rulebook. A few guests laughed awkwardly, sensing the undercurrent but pretending not to. That was how the Vance family functioned. Reality was performance, applause mandatory. Dinner arrived. Roasted lamb, burgundy reduction, crystal glasses of vintage red. The wine shimmered ruby in the chandelier's glow. Eleanor lifted her glass first. To family, she said, voice honeyed. To family, echoed Sterling. Julian added, even the ones who left it. Paige smiled faintly and lifted her own. To truth, she said quietly, the one thing we never buried deep enough. For a fraction of a second, Eleanor's gaze flickered. Surprise, then contempt. Then came the clink of glass. Paige drank. So did they. Paige drank. 10 minutes later, her pulse began to slow. Her vision blurred. The edges of her hearing turned to cotton. Eleanor's smile didn't falter. You really shouldn't have come back, darling, she murmured. Sterling added, almost apologetically, you were always too clever for your own good. Paige's glass slipped from her hand. It shattered, crimson and glass shards spreading like a wound. She hit the floor, body convulsing, but her eyes stayed open. And even as her heartbeat faltered, she smiled. Because she recognized the taste, thalidoxin, a designer neurotoxin. Rare, painful, traceable, and neutralizable. They'd forgotten who she'd become, who she'd had to become. When Paige had walked out 12 years ago, she'd walked straight into the CIA survival unit, where sentiment was a liability and pain was just practice. She'd learned how to fake death with precision, pulse suppression, shallow respiration, muscle control. Now, lying on her parents' marble floor, she was back in training again. She heard Julian's voice, distant but arrogant. Is she? Eleanor answered, she's gone. At least she finally did something useful. Sterling sighed. Dispose of her quietly. We'll say she overdosed. Their footsteps faded. The servants dragged her body toward the cellar, the family's favorite grave for secrets. Hours passed. The night grew colder. The mansion slept. Then, a breath. Soft, shallow, deliberate. Paige's eyes snapped open. Her muscles screamed as she rolled onto her side. Her pulse hammered again, slow but strong. She sat up, tasted metal, spat blood, and smiled through it. Nice try, Mother. The lock on the cellar door clicked as she tested it. Simple tumbler. She pulled the butterfly-shaped hair clip from her braid, the one Eleanor had once gifted her as a cruel joke on her 16th birthday, calling it something pretty for something pointless. Fitting that, it would now be her key to freedom. A twist, a click. A door opened. Paige stepped back into the mansion's shadows, the ghost who refused to stay buried. Upstairs, she found her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the girl they'd disowned. Her eyes were harder. Her smile, dangerous. Her pulse, steady. She checked the reflection again, murmuring under her breath, "You wanted a liability. You built a weapon." In the kitchen, she took a phone from a drawer and her mother's, left charging. Locked, of course. But Eleanor's passwords hadn't changed since 2008. Julian. Paige scrolled through messages, screenshots, and private documents, each one more damning than the last. Transfers, falsified accounts, charitable donations, rerouted through shell companies tied to defense contracts. It wasn't just greed, it was empire-level corruption. And it all pointed to one thing. Paige's disappearance wasn't personal. It was practical. She wasn't a daughter. She was a liability line item. Outside headlights swept the drive. Security was returning. Paige slipped into the shadows, exited through the servant stairwell, and vanished into the cold night. By the time her parents realized she was gone, all that would remain of her in their home was a shattered wine glass and a missing phone. But in her pocket was the butterfly clip, the same one that had opened her cage, and on her wrist, a faint scar where the poison had kissed her skin, now her reminder that death itself had learned to underestimate her. At a cheap motel 2 towns away, Paige patched into a secured frequency. She entered a 6-digit code and waited. The voice that answered was familiar, calm, steady, slightly amused. "Blake, you sound like trouble." "Spectre," she whispered. "I'm compromised. Family operation turned black. Request protocol Alpha 7 extraction." There was a pause, then, "Tell me what you need." Paige stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, eyes bloodshot but alive. "I don't need saving," she said. "I need proof." The line went silent, and then Spectre chuckled. "Now that's the Paige I remember." And as the first light of dawn hit the motel window, she pulled out a map. Lines, red pins, old addresses. Her childhood home wasn't her prison anymore. It was her crime scene. This time, she wouldn't be the one in the dark. This time, she'd bring the whole mansion down, brick by brick. And when she was done, the name Vance would no longer mean power. It would mean perjury. The motel was a skeleton of neon and silence, a place for people who had nowhere left to hide or too much to reveal. Paige leaned over the flickering desk lamp, spreading out her notes, her hands trembling, not from fear but from adrenaline. 12 years of distance had become a single night of clarity. Everything her parents ever owned, every company, contract, and lie, was tangled in the same web of money and ego. And at the center of it, the Vance family crest, virtue and strength. The irony was so sharp she could taste it. She started with Eleanor. Her charity, the Vance Initiative for Global Recovery, was supposedly funding post-war reconstruction. In truth, the accounts showed hundreds of millions in consulting transfers, routed through Cayman banks, ending in defense supplier kickbacks. Her mother had been buying influence under the guise of compassion. Classic Eleanor, sin dressed in satin. Then came Sterling. The Vance group of companies had secured multiple defense contracts through expedited review, all signed off by one government auditor, Marcus Thorne. But Marcus Thorne was declared dead 6 years ago. Paige's hand tightened around the pen. She'd met dead men before, and they usually had a story to tell. By sunrise, she had 2 names circled on the motel notepad: Anna Sharma, attorney; Rex Donovan, forensics. Anna was fearless, brilliant, and hated corruption more than God loved forgiveness. Rex was ex-FBI, a man who could find a fingerprint on fire. Together, they were the kind of allies you earned only by bleeding first. Spectre, Luca Navarro, had called them in already. When Paige opened the door, they were both waiting in the parking lot. Anna wore her trench coat like armor, coffee in hand. Rex was taller than she remembered, carrying a box of tools instead of weapons. "You look like hell," Anna said dryly. Paige smirked. "Poisoned wine. It's not my best color." Rex raised a brow. "You're serious?" "Always." Anna stepped forward, her tone softening. "You know what you're starting, right? Taking on your family isn't prosecution, no, it's war." Paige nodded. "Then I guess it's genetic." They moved to a safe house, or a derelict printing factory Spectre used for deep operations. The concrete walls still smelled of ink and secrets. Paige pinned photos, bank logs, and legal documents onto a corkboard, each string connecting her mother's foundation to a corporate ghost. Each ghost traced back to Julian. Julian's the keystone, she said, tapping his photo. They funneled everything through him: fake charities, shell cores, proxy donations. He's too stupid to build it himself, which means your father signed off, Anna finished. Paige nodded. Or someone signed for him. Spectre appeared via video feed, the glow from his screen reflecting the silver in his hair. Langley's not officially aware of this conversation, he said. Unofficially, I'm impressed. You've built a case the DOJ couldn't crack in 5 years. Paige leaned closer. You trained me for infiltration. You didn't say I'd have to infiltrate my own bloodline. Family's the most fortified target, he said. No protocol for that. Anna cut in. We need a warrant for discovery. I can't get one without a live witness. Paige stared at the photo of Marcus Thorne. Then we find the dead man. 2 days later, Rex tracked Thorne's financial signature to a rental cabin outside Eureka, California. No utilities, no neighbors, no trace. Exactly the kind of place a ghost would choose to exist. They found him in the garden, alive, older, eyes haunted. He froze when Paige stepped out of the car. You're supposed to be dead, she said. He smiled weakly. So are you. Thorne told them everything. Sterling had paid him to approve illegal defense contracts tied to weapons manufacturing in unstable regions. When Thorne threatened exposure, they staged his death. A car fire, fake dental records, payoff in silence. Paige listened without blinking. Her hands were steady, but her voice wasn't. They killed my father's humanity, and they tried to kill mine. Thorne slid a flash drive across the table. All the files are here. Every name, every payment, every lie. Rex grinned. That's enough to bury them. Paige corrected him quietly. No, that's enough to resurrect me. The storm came faster than expected. Within 24 hours of their discovery, Eleanor froze her accounts and issued public statements painting Paige as an emotionally unstable ex-agent suffering from delusions of persecution. The press devoured it. Every tabloid headline spat venom. Disgraced CIA operative targets own family. Betrayal or breakdown? Anna threw the papers down. They're building the insanity defense before the accusation. Paige smiled grimly. Then we changed the narrative. She walked straight into the courthouse the next morning, unannounced. The marble echoed under her boots. Reporters swarmed. Microphones in her face, cameras flashing. She didn't hide. She didn't blink. Captain Blake, one reporter shouted, is it true you're accusing your parents of attempted murder? Paige turned to the camera, calm and deliberate. Not accusing, confirming. It aired that evening, her first strike. The Vance brand began to crack. That night, Spectre called again. You're burning daylight and bridges, he warned. Good, she said. They built both out of gasoline. He sighed. You can't win this alone. Paige looked through the window at the city's skyline, glittering towers built by her family's hands and her silence. I already did once, she murmured. When I walked away, Julian was the next to crumble. The investigation unearthed his shell company's involvement in the accidental explosion that killed 3 engineers, whistleblowers who had tried to expose the falsified reports. Rex found the digital forgeries in Julian's laptop. Anna secured the warrant. Paige delivered it herself. She found Julian in the mansion's wine cellar. Poetic symmetry. He looked up, startled. How are you? She tossed the warrant at his feet. The difference between us, Julian? You inherited power. I earned survival. He tried to laugh, voice cracking. You think this'll make you better than us? No, she said softly. Just cleaner. By the time the trial date was announced, the Vance family name was poison. Sterling's empire had collapsed under frozen assets. Eleanor's charities were under federal review. Julian was under indictment. And Paige, the daughter they disowned, buried, and erased, was the one holding the evidence that could destroy them all. But this wasn't revenge. It was revelation. It wasn't about making them pay. It was about showing the world what a family built on deception truly costs. The night before the hearing, Spectre met her in person, the first time in years. He handed her a single document, embossed with a government seal. What's this? She asked. Your reinstatement, he said. They want you back. Paige stared at it, then smiled sadly. Tell them thank you, but I think I've had enough missions. He nodded, eyes soft. You were never working for them, Paige. You were working for the truth. Same thing, she whispered. On a good day, outside, the wind howled across the bay, tugging at her coat. She closed her eyes and let it hit her. The first clean wind she'd felt in years. Tomorrow, she'd face them in the one arena they couldn't control. Not the mansion, not the press, a courtroom, where truth, not money, carried weight. And for the first time in her life, Paige Vance would finally get to speak without being silenced. The courthouse in San Mateo looked more like a cathedral than a seat of justice. Marble pillars, vaulted ceilings, sunlight filtering through tall windows that made the room look holy enough to forgive anything. But Paige knew better. This wasn't church, it was war. And she'd been trained for worse. The pews were full. Reporters, spectators, old allies turned voyeurs. Every click of a camera felt like a bullet ricocheting. At the defense table sat the family that used to be hers. Eleanor Vance in a cream suit, pristine, pearl brooch flashing like a blade. Sterling, wheelchair-bound, veins like ropes under papery skin. And Julian, pale, twitching, his lawyer whispering strategy like a snake's hiss. When Paige entered, heads turned. Gasps, whispers. That's her. The disgraced agent, the rogue daughter. Her boots echoed across the marble, each step deliberate, grounding. She didn't look at them. Not yet. Anna leaned close as they sat. You ready for this? Paige smiled faintly. I've been ready since they poisoned me. Across the aisle, Eleanor watched her daughter with something between admiration and venom. You clean up well, she said sweetly. Paige's tone was calm. So does guilt. The judge entered. Court is now in session. The People vs. Vance Corporation et al. The words struck the air like a gavel themselves. Official, irreversible. The prosecution began with evidence of corruption. Falsified reports, laundered donations, shell companies. For every exhibit shown, Paige already had a counter. She'd lived these crimes in whispers and shadows. She'd seen the faces of the men and women they'd exploited. Engineers silenced, workers ruined, soldiers betrayed. Then came the defense's counterstrike. Eleanor's attorney stood, voice syrup smooth. Ladies and gentlemen, my clients have been victims of an elaborate fabrication, orchestrated by a woman with a documented history of instability. He gestured toward Paige. This is not justice. It's obsession. Anna stood before Paige could react. Obsession? She turned to the jury. My client's only obsession was surviving her own family. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the judge's brow furrowed slightly. The first witness was Marcus Thorne, the man who was supposed to be dead. When he entered, Sterling went white. Eleanor froze mid-breath. The jurors straightened in their seats, as if resurrection itself had just walked in. Marcus spoke softly but clearly. I was paid by Sterling Vance to falsify audit reports approving illegal defense contracts. When I refused further compliance, a car accident was staged. I was presumed dead. He nodded toward Paige. She found me. Not the police, not the government. Her. The courtroom murmured, the sound of centuries of legacy cracking under one man's confession. Eleanor's composure broke only once. When Anna played the recorded tape, Eleanor's voice, calm, cruel, deliberate, she's a risk. Eliminate her quietly. I won't bury another scandal. It played 3 times. Each repetition, another nail in the coffin of the Vance reputation. Julian hid his face in his hands. Paige didn't flinch. She had lived that sentence in her nightmares. Now she was free of it. During recess, reporters swarmed. Questions came like shrapnel. How does it feel, Ms. Blake, to face your own mother? Paige answered evenly. It feels like standing in front of a mirror and refusing to blink. Back inside, Anna whispered, they're cracking, but the court will want motive. Why poison their own daughter? Paige exhaled slowly. They didn't try to kill me because I was weak. They tried because I was proof they were. When court resumed, the next witness was someone unexpected. Rex Donovan, her forensic ally. He presented data showing false crash evidence tied to Julian. proving Paige's innocence in a long-buried family scandal where she'd been blamed for an accident he'd caused. The jury visibly recoiled at the extent of manipulation. Eleanor's mask slipped again. "You think exposing us makes you righteous?" she hissed across the table. Paige's tone didn't rise. "It makes me honest." Then came the final blow. Julian's own emails, hundreds of them, leaked into evidence, revealing every secret directive Eleanor had sent. Anna didn't even have to read them aloud. The room buzzed with horror. Eleanor's attorney stood, defeated. "No further defense, Your Honor." The judge nodded gravely. "This court finds probable cause for prosecution under charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted homicide." The gavel hit once, twice. The echoes sounded like freedom. Eleanor rose slowly, trembling but defiant. "You think you've won, Paige?" she spat. "This family built nations. You're nothing without us." Paige walked toward her, close enough for the cameras to catch her words, but low enough only Eleanor could hear. "I was nothing because of you, but now I'm myself, and you can't buy that." Eleanor's eyes flickered. Rage, grief, recognition, then emptiness. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall again, the same kind that had pattered against the windows of the mansion the night she almost died. Reporters called after her, flashes lighting the wet street. "Agent Blake, what's next for you?" She didn't stop walking. She just said over her shoulder, "Peace." Anna caught up beside her, smiling. "You know the papers are going to call this the family that ate itself." Paige laughed softly. "Then let them choke on it." That night, alone in her hotel room, Paige poured herself a single glass of wine. Not for irony, but closure. She stared at the dark surface for a moment, then set it down untouched. She didn't need to drink to celebrate. She'd already survived the poison that mattered most. She pulled the butterfly hair clip from her pocket, turning it over in her hand. Its edges glimmered under the lamp. A child's trinket. A weapon. A key. She whispered, "I'm free." And for once, it didn't sound like defiance, it sounded like truth. But freedom wasn't peace. Not yet. Because redemption wasn't about destroying monsters. It was about refusing to become one. Tomorrow, she'd have to decide what to do with everything she now owned. The remnants of the Vance empire. The money, the power, the ashes. But tonight, she let the rain fall and the past drown quietly. The Vance mansion didn't look grand anymore. Weeks of police tape, media trucks, and silent shame had turned it from a palace into a tomb. The gates, once guarded by men in tailored suits, now stood open, like the mouth of something that had finally stopped pretending not to devour its own. Paige stood outside, the cold wind brushing through her hair. No cameras now, no security. Just her and the ghosts. A government escort had arranged her visit. 15 minutes, no press, no contact beyond conversation. Her mother's request, her mother's last chance. Inside, the hall smelled of disinfectant and wilted lilies. The portraits on the walls were veiled in dust cloths, like covered graves. And there, in the living room, where so many false smiles had been rehearsed, sat Eleanor Vance, no longer radiant, no longer untouchable, just human. Dressed in a gray cardigan, an ankle monitor blinking softly at her feet. "You came," Eleanor said. Her voice was weaker now, but still poised, trained to sound like authority even when the world had revoked it. "I did," Paige said. "You asked." Eleanor's eyes traced her daughter's face, as though memorizing someone she didn't recognize. "I thought I'd raised a reflection. Turns out I raised a mirror." Paige took a slow breath. "I'm not here for metaphors." "No," Eleanor smiled faintly. "You're here for answers." "I already have them," Paige replied. "I just wanted to see if you could still look at me." The silence stretched. Outside, a storm gathered. Inside, only the slow tick of the mantel clock. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "Do you hate me?" Paige thought of the cellar, the poison, the years of erasure. She thought of the little girl, hiding trophies behind encyclopedias, waiting for a kind word that never came. Then she said simply, "No, I don't hate you." Eleanor blinked, confusion flickering behind her eyes. "I learned to stop hating things that taught me survival," Paige continued. "You didn't raise me to be good. You raised me to endure. And I did. Eleanor looked away, the weight of decades pressing on her chest. I wanted to make you strong. You made me numb, Paige said. But numbness isn't strength. Compassion is. And that's what you never understood. Eleanor's voice cracked. Do you think you're better than me? Paige hesitated, then said softly, No, just different. She walked toward the window, her reflection ghosted in the rain-streaked glass. When I was 14, you said I was too emotional to survive this world, she said. But the only reason I did survive it was because I still felt things, even after you told me not to. Eleanor turned in her chair. And what now, Paige? You've destroyed everything. The name, the company, the fortune. What will you build out of the ashes? Paige turned, eyes steady. Something that doesn't need to hide behind a name. They sat in silence again. Eleanor's hands trembled in her lap, old rings glinting under the lamp. Julian won't forgive you, she said. Paige smiled faintly. Then he'll have to learn what forgiveness costs. Sterling can't even speak, Eleanor murmured. He's still your father. Paige's gaze softened. He made his choices. I made mine. Then she added quietly, and you. You can still make yours. Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? Paige walked closer, placing a small envelope on the table. Inside was a single key. It's the access to a fund. Everything left in offshore accounts. I traced it. I didn't burn it. Eleanor's eyes widened. Why? Paige met her gaze. Because I'm not you. That's why. Rain began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like impatient ghosts. Eleanor whispered, And what am I supposed to do with what's left? Paige looked around the crumbling mansion. Maybe build something that's real this time. A school. A shelter. Something that gives instead of takes. Eleanor's lip trembled. You think redemption is that easy? Paige's tone was calm, almost tender. No, but it's a start. She turned to leave. Eleanor's voice stopped her at the doorway. You sound like your father, she said. The way he used to sound before I broke him. Paige paused, then said quietly, You didn't break him. You just made sure no one saw him trying to heal. As she stepped outside, the rain poured harder, cold, cleansing. The escort offered her an umbrella. She refused. Some things you let fall, some storms you walk through. Her phone buzzed. A message from Spectre. You free now? She typed back. Not yet, but getting there. Then another from Anna. The DOJ wants to use your case as a training model for corporate whistleblower protection. You okay with that? Paige smiled. If it helps one person get out before it's too late, yes. That night, she drove north. Past the cities, past the neon, into the wild where noise fades into breathing. She reached the cabin in Maine just before dawn, the one she'd bought under her new name. No cameras, no bodyguards, just ocean and wind. Gable, her dog, barked once as she opened the door, tail wagging. Hey, boy, she said softly, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. Still guarding the home we actually earned? He wagged again, as if to say yes. She set down her bag, took off her boots, and walked barefoot onto the porch. The horizon was just beginning to glow. Sunrise over still water, gold bleeding into gray. She watched it like a confession, like proof that light doesn't ask permission to return. Later, she opened the box Spectre had given her, her old badge, worn and cold. She turned it in her hands, then set it beside her father's broken watch she'd found years ago. Two relics of time and identity. One chosen. One survived. She whispered almost prayerfully, maybe it wasn't about beating them. Maybe it was about becoming whole. Her reflection in the window didn't look like an agent or a daughter anymore. It looked like someone who had finally stopped running from her own pulse. As the first sunlight touched her face, she took the butterfly hair clip, the one that had once opened her prison door, and buried it in the garden soil beside a row of new seedlings. A symbol buried not in mourning, but in growth. She brushed the dirt from her hands and stood tall, wind cutting across her cheek. Voiceover soft, resolute. They tried to bury me like a secret, but I wasn't meant to disappear. I was meant to begin again. The sky blazed open. And Paige smiled for the first time in years, no, though not the smile of victory, but of peace. Morning came slow over Maine. The cabin sat in a hush of salt air and pine, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Paige stood by the window with a mug of coffee, the same way she'd started every day since walking away from her old life. Outside, Gable nosed through wet grass, chasing the wind like it was a friend. For a long time, she'd envied that kind of innocence. Now she just let herself watch it. The radio murmured low in the background. News, voices, the world moving on without her. Then came a headline that made her still. Former defense magnate Sterling Vance passes away in home hospice. No statement from surviving family members. Paige exhaled through her nose. Neither relief nor sadness, just an end. The man who'd given her his silence now left her with it permanently. She poured another cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and let the moment pass without ceremony. Around noon, a postal jeep stopped at the end of the dirt road. Mail came rarely. The bills were digital, her existence invisible. She stepped onto the porch barefoot, waving at the young postman. "Package for Miss Blake," he said. She smiled faintly. "That's me." The return address caught her eye. Department of Defense, Washington, D.C. Her pulse quickened. For a second, she wondered if this was some delayed summons, a pull back into a life she'd buried. But inside was only a plain envelope, stamped with an official seal and a handwritten note. Forwarded at request of Mr. Luca Navarro, CIA read. Personal correspondence enclosed. She sat down on the porch step, the envelope trembling slightly in her hand. The seal broke with a dry whisper. Inside, a single letter and a photograph. The photo came first. A boy, maybe 17 now, standing in a school courtyard, holding a science trophy, beaming like sunlight. Behind him, a teacher held a small banner. The Gabriel Vance Scholarship for Resilient Youth. Paige frowned. Her real name wasn't public anymore. So who would know to dedicate anything to her? Then she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was careful, uneven, like someone learning to be whole again. Dear Agent Blake, I still think of you that way. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. You were the woman who pulled me out of that safe house in Aleppo when everything was burning. You gave me your water and said, "Keep breathing. Every breath is a new choice." I didn't know your name then. I found it years later, reading about what you did in San Mateo, the trial, the truth. When I got the settlement from the humanitarian fund you helped expose, I used it to start something small, a scholarship for kids who survived what I did. I named it after your father. You said once he taught you to fix broken radios. I like to think that's what we're both doing now, fixing signals, one by one. Thank you for not turning cold when the world tried to freeze you. Because of that, I didn't either. With all my gratitude, Gabriel Reyes, formerly Subject 04. Paige read it twice, then again. Each line felt like someone breathing life into the parts of her she hadn't realized were still starving for it. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in smaller handwriting, were the words, "Every breath is a new choice." You were right. For the first time in a decade, tears came without shame. She let them. They fell quiet and warm, soaking into the wood grain of the porch. That night, the air smelled of rain again. Paige walked down to the shore, the letter folded in her jacket pocket. The tide shimmered like liquid glass beneath the moon. Each wave whispered the same simple truth. You're still here. She crouched, drew a line in the wet sand with her fingertip. Not her name, but a single word. Begin. Behind her, the cabin light flickered on. She turned back to see Spector's figure standing at the doorway. Older now, slower, but still sharp as ever. He raised a hand in greeting. "I thought you'd retired from haunting agents," she said as he approached. He chuckled. "I came for the coffee." "You drove 6 hours for coffee?" "Good coffee," he said, smiling. "And a better view." They stood side by side, watching the waves. "You got the letter," he said. She nodded. "You sent it. Just redirected it. Thought you deserved to know." Paige sighed. "He remembered me." Spector looked at her. "You gave him something to remember. Something to... Most agents don't get that luxury. Maybe that's the only part worth keeping." They sat on the sand until the stars came out. Quiet, comfortable, whole. Spectre handed her a small envelope of his own. I wasn't sure if you wanted this, he said. It's your father's military commendation. They found it in storage. Figured you might. She turned it over in her hands. The ribbon faded, the metal cool. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'll hang it next to the seeds I planted. Spectre grinned. Still poetic, huh? She shrugged. I had to get it from somewhere. They laughed quietly. Later, after he left, Paige returned to the porch. The night had gone still again, save for the low hum of crickets and waves. She took out her notebook, the one she'd started after leaving the CIA. Its first page read, Truth is not a weapon, it's a return. On a fresh page, she wrote, Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past. It releases the hand that keeps turning the same page. She closed the book, laid it beside the letter, and whispered into the dark. Dad, I think I finally did it. The wind moved through the trees and not answering, just listening. And that was enough. I was born from a family that mistook cruelty for strength. But strength isn't the absence of feeling. It's the courage to heal what hurt you. They taught me to survive. I taught myself to live. If you've ever been betrayed, underestimated, or erased, but refused to disappear, this story was written for you. Subscribe for more tales where survival becomes victory, compassion outlasts cruelty, and truth stands when legacy falls.